Somewhere in the temple courts of first-century Jerusalem, a priest stands in a circle of other men dressed in white linen. It is still dark. Dawn has not yet broken. He is waiting for a number to be called. He has been waiting for this particular number his entire career, because the task assigned by this lottery to burn incense alone inside the sanctuary before the great curtain could only be won once. One morning, one man, one unrepeatable moment in a priestly lifetime. Most priests died never having won it. The man waiting in that circle this morning is named Zechariah. He does not yet know, slow, that the morning he has waited decades for is about to become the most terrifying and glorious moment of his life. But before we follow him through that curtain, we need to understand the ordinary physical world that produced him. Because nothing about what happens next makes full sense until you see what an ordinary day in the temple actually looked like. He wakes before the city does. Not in the gleaming marble chamber of children's Bible illustrations. The one where the priest stands straight-backed with a jeweled breastplate catching every ray of light, serene and fundamentally removed from the texture of ordinary life. That man did not exist. In 1969, archaeologists led by Nahman Avigad, digging in Jerusalem's Jewish quarter, uncovered the homes of priestly families and found something quieter but more revealing. Modest stone rooms with walls plastered and painted in red, yellow, and white geometric panels. The man who actually woke before dawn most likely did so on a sleeping mat of woven reeds in a space that was functional, cared for, and unmistakably human. The air would have carried the faint mineral smell of limestone dust and the richer scent of olive oil from lamps and skin. This is a reconstruction, not a sermon. Every object, every smell, every measurement comes from a named source. Excavation, the Mishnah's Tractate Tamid, and the writings of Josephus himself, a priest. Nothing here is invented. This is the world that built Zechariah. Walk through it carefully, because by the time we return to that circle in the dark, and the number is finally called, you will understand exactly what it cost a man to stand where he is about to stand. Before we follow the priest through his day, we need to stand where he stood and see what he saw. Because the environment itself is the first correction. The Temple Mount in the 1st century was the largest religious precinct in the ancient world. Herod the Great, who began his expansion of the temple complex around 20 BCE, constructed a platform covering approximately 144,000 square meters. Roughly 36 acres of artificially leveled ground, supported by massive retaining walls. The southern retaining wall, portions of which still stand today, was built from limestone blocks, some of which weigh over 500 tons. Josephus, in his Jewish War, noted that some of the stones were 45 cubits long, approximately 67 feet, and that laborers working on the project numbered in the tens of thousands. The great eastern gate of the temple complex stood 40 cubits high and 12 cubits wide, plated with gold and silver. In the morning wind, Josephus records, such gates groaned faintly across the city. But the priest did not live on the Temple Mount. He lived in the city below it. The priestly families of Jerusalem occupied the upper city, the western hill overlooking the temple, breadth across the Teropoion Valley. Avigad's excavations of the Herodian quarter, conducted between 1969 and 1983 under the auspices of Hebrew University, uncovered the remains of 6 mansions belonging to affluent Jerusalem families, at least some of whom the excavation evidence strongly suggests were of priestly lineage. Most priestly families did not live in the largest of these. They lived in smaller stone houses on the hillside. Courtyards, cisterns, and storage rooms arranged around a central living space, the floors either flagstone or mosaic. One exceptional black and white geometric mosaic floor recovered from the Herodian quarter remains well preserved today. His feet meet that floor in complete darkness. The single clay oil lamp on its stone shelf has burned down to almost nothing. 3 objects defined the physical geography of his household, and each one tells you something essential about his world. The first is the stone vessel. Archaeologists excavating Jerusalem from the Second Temple period have recovered stone mugs, stone bowls, stone jars, and stone basins in quantities so large that the Jewish quarter excavations identified entire workshops dedicated to their manufacture. These vessels were carved from soft local limestone, chalk shaped on a lathe. The reason for their prevalence is directly theological. The purity laws of Leviticus specified that clay vessels, once rendered impure, could not be purified and had to be broken. Stone vessels, by contrast, could not contract impurity according to the halakhic interpretation of the period. For a priestly family, in which purity was not a religious aspiration, but a professional requirement, stone vessels were not a luxury. They were essential equipment. The second is the mikveh. Every priestly residence in the archaeological record contains one. The Herodian quarter excavations uncovered ritual immersion pools hewn directly into the bedrock beneath several of the mansions, fed by rainwater channeled from the roof through plastered conduits, divided by a center partition. Breath, one side for entering impure, one side for emerging pure. A physical architecture of transition built into the stone beneath the house. The minimum required volume was 40 seah, approximately 200 gallons. The water in Jerusalem in winter is cold, not cool, cold. The third is the clay bread oven, the tanur. Cylindrical, made from fired clay, approximately 60 centimeters in diameter, standing in the courtyard. Bread was baked daily, and in priestly households, the bread carried additional significance.
For the priests.
The terumah, the priestly share of agricultural produce, was separated before the rest could be eaten. The smoke from the tanur rose into the still pre-dawn air. It smelled of charred barley and the specific mineral quality of Jerusalem limestone holding heat. These 3 objects, stone vessel, mikveh, bread oven, tell you that the sacred in this tradition was organized around the body's daily activities. What you touch, where you wash, what you eat. The priestly life was not withdrawal from physical reality. It was extraordinary attention to it. Now enter the Temple Mount with us. Cross through the soreg, the stone lattice barrier beyond which no Gentile could pass. Pause on pain of death, and the noise of the outer markets, slow shifts register. The air is different here. Thicker, not quite incense yet. More like wood smoke and animal warmth combined with the faint iron-copper edge of blood. This is the smell of the functioning temple. Not unpleasant, but not what you expected. Through the Nicanor gate, whose bronze doors Josephus tells us required 20 men to open and close, into the court of the priests. The great bronze altar stands before you, 32 cubits square at its base, approximately 48 feet wide, rising in 3 stepped tiers to a height of 10 cubits, roughly 15 feet. A ramp on the south side, not stairs, because Exodus chapter 20 forbade ascending steps to the altar. 4 horns at its upper corners, 3 fires burning simultaneously, one for the main offering, one for the incense, one kept burning and as the eternal flame. The ash from this altar accumulated in a cone at its center. In busy seasons, the Mishnah records, the pile could rise as tall as a man before it was cleared. This is where our priest works. The priestly service in the Jerusalem temple was not assigned permanently to individual priests. It was distributed by lot. The system is described in the Mishnah's tractate Tamid, with a precision that reads like an operations manual, because it essentially was one. There were 24 divisions of priests called mishmarot. Each division served 1 week of temple service, twice per year, plus the 3 major pilgrimage festivals. Within each division, the specific duties for each day were allocated by lottery. Every morning, before dawn, the priest who woke before the sun did not know, when he rose, whether he would be slaughtering the morning sacrifice, carrying its blood to the altar, removing the previous day's ashes, or burning incense alone in the sanctuary. The lottery determined everything. The Mishnah records the procedure in Tamid 3:1. The supervising officer would arrive before the others, direct the candidates to stand in a circle, and count around it in a predetermined number until the count landed on one man. That man performed the assigned duty. The process was repeated for each task. A crowd of men in white linen standing in a stone-floored room in the pre-dawn dark, waiting for a number to be called. Most of them returned to their quarters to wait for another day. The removal of the altar ashes was the first physical task of the morning. The priest who won that lottery climbed the ramp to the altar top, still warm from the previous evening's fire, and gathered the accumulated ash into a pile at the center. He descended, changed into slightly less sacred garments, and carried the ash outside. Even the sacred refuse of sacrifice required specific, attentive handling. The slaughter of the morning tamid, the daily whole offering, followed. The Mishnah breaks this offering into 13 distinct tasks, each assigned by separate lottery. The animal was a male lamb, 1 year old, without blemish, inspected the previous evening and held in the temple precincts overnight. The priest who performed the slaughter held the lamb's forelegs. A second priest held its hind legs. A third held its head. The throat cut was made in a single practiced motion, with a blade sharp enough that the animal did not struggle. The blood was caught in a basin and carried quickly to the altar. It had to be applied before it congealed. It was thrown with a specific motion against the corner of the altar, so that it spattered across 2 surfaces simultaneously, satisfying the requirement that the blood touch all 4 sides. The priest who carried the blood basin walked quickly. His hands were red. His linen garments, despite every precaution, carried the smell of it. Other priests moved simultaneously, one carrying the head, one the right foreleg, one the left, ascending the altar ramp in a line, depositing each portion in its designated location on the fire. Cedar wood burns differently from oak or olive. The fat portions rendered quickly against the high heat. The combination of cedar smoke, rendering fat, blood on hot stone, and morning wind off the Judean hills created a sensory experience identifiable from a great distance. The Talmud records a tradition that the smoke of the altar in Jerusalem could be smelled as far as Jericho, approximately 15 miles to the northeast. A priestly family in 1st century Jerusalem ate well by the standards of their world, not because they were wealthy in the ordinary sense, but because the structure of the Torah's agricultural economy directed specific portions of nearly every harvest to them. The terumah, the priestly tithe, was separated from every Israelite's grain, wine, and oil before the rest could be consumed. The challah, a portion of every batch of dough, was given to the priest. The firstborn of every kosher animal flock belonged to the priestly system. The shoulder, 2 cheeks, and stomach of every slaughtered animal went to the priest. The morning meal was wheat bread, olive oil, dried figs. The physical labor of temple service burned somewhere between 2,500 and 3,500 calories per day for an active working man. The priest's body was a working body, and the priestly economy had been designed across centuries to sustain it. But the food came with conditions. Terumah could only be eaten in a state of ritual purity. If any member of the household had contracted any form of impurity described in Leviticus, the terumah on the table in front of them could not be touched. It sat there. Food that could not be eaten, that would have to be burned rather than consumed. a daily physical reminder that the privilege of the priestly table was inseparable from its obligations. The priest's prayer life was not optional. It was not private. It was embedded in the structure of the temple service itself and extended into every rhythm of his household day. The Shema, the declaration drawn from Deuteronomy 6:4, was recited twice daily. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. The Mishnah in Tractate Berakot specifies the precise window for the morning recitation. It must be said after there is enough light to distinguish between the colors blue and white, a standard tied directly to the sky above Jerusalem in the first hours after dawn. The priest, standing in his courtyard facing east, reciting the Shema as the sky shifted from black to deep blue to the first pale line of orange above the Mount of Olives. This was not performance. It was orientation. The prayer positioned him in space, in time, and in obligation before anything else happened. Then he descended to the temple for the lottery. There were multiple lotteries. Each morning, the first assigned the ash removal, the second assigned the slaughter and its 13 tasks. The third determined who would enter the holy place and burn the incense. This third lottery was different from all the others in one specific way. A priest who had already won the incense lottery on any previous occasion was excluded from winning it again. The reasoning is explicit in the Mishnah. The incense offering was considered so intimate a service, so significant a privilege, that it should be distributed as widely as possible across the priestly divisions. In a large priestly family, a man might wait his entire career, 20 years, 30 years, for that lottery to land on him. And when it landed, it would land only once. Once in a career. One morning, one unrepeatable opportunity to stand alone before the curtain. Zechariah stands in the circle with the others. He has been in this circle before. Dozens of mornings across years of service rotations. He knows the count. He knows how to hold still while the number moves around the circle. He has learned over time not to anticipate. He keeps his hands at his sides. He looks straight ahead. The supervising officer begins the count. The number lands on him. The holy place was 60 feet long, 30 feet wide, and 60 feet high. Its walls were lined with cedar paneling overlaid with gold. The floor was gold. 3 sacred objects occupied this room. The golden menorah, its 7 lamps recently trimmed and refueled. The table of showbread, holding 12 loaves freshly placed each Shabbat. And in the center of the room, directly before the great curtain, the golden incense altar, 1 cubit square, 2 cubits tall, 4 horns at its corners. Zechariah stands at the threshold. His hands are steady. Years of training have made them so. But the quality of the silence inside this room is different from every other morning he has entered it for lesser duties. He has been in the holy place before. He has never stood here carrying this. He steps forward. He pours the incense onto the coals. The smoke rises in the enclosed space. The compound was a mixture of 11 ingredients: frankincense, myrrh, cassia, spikenard, and 7 additional spices. The formula was maintained exclusively by a single priestly family across generations. It was reportedly kept secret enough that the women of that family never wore perfume, lest anyone suspect them of carrying traces of the sacred compound for personal use. Anyone who has been in a small stone room with burning incense knows something of what happens next. The smell becomes the whole environment, not a note in the air, a presence, something that touches the back of the throat, the inside of the lungs. In the sanctuary, the Ketoret would have been embedded in the stone walls, the wooden ceiling beams, the curtains, the garments of every priest who entered. The smell went home with him. It was in his clothes for the rest of the day. It was in his hair. Zechariah prostrates himself on the floor of the gold-lined room. Outside, in the courts, the gathered worshippers do the same. Luke 1:10 states this explicitly. The whole multitude of the people were praying outside at the hour of incense. Every person present understood what was happening behind that veil. And then the angel appears, not in the outer courts, not in the open air where the crowds are gathered. Inside, in the gold-lined room, at the incense altar, at the one unrepeatable moment of a priestly career that Zechariah has waited decades to reach. Luke records that Zechariah was terrified when he saw him. The Greek word is iterakhthe. He was shaken, disturbed, thrown into agitation. This was not gentle wonder. This was a man whose body, trained by decades of priestly service to know exactly what belonged in this room and what did not. Encountering something that had no place in any category his training had prepared him for. Gabriel speaks. He tells Zechariah that his wife Elizabeth will bear a son, that the son will be filled with the Holy Spirit from birth, that he will go before the Lord in the spirit and power of Elijah. Zechariah asks how he can know this is true. He is struck silent. He exits the sanctuary, unable to speak. The people waiting in the outer courts, who have been prostrate in prayer, who have been waiting longer than usual, who know that the incense priest should have emerged by now, look up. They see a man who cannot form words, making signs with his hands, his face carrying something they have no name for. The morning he waited his entire career for has arrived, and it has exceeded every version of it he ever imagined. He descends the temple steps in silence, still carrying the smell of the incense in his hair. Zechariah belonged to the division of Abijah, 8th of the 24 Mishmarot, listed in 1 Chronicles, chapter 24. Luke states this explicitly, and it is the kind of detail that would have meant everything to a priestly family, and almost nothing to anyone else. It told you which 2 weeks of the year your husband worked in Jerusalem, which families your children grew up alongside, which traditions your household carried that the division of Jehoiarib or Jediah did not. The 24 priestly divisions were not merely administrative categories. They were the primary social structure of priestly life. Each division associated with a specific region of the country, carrying its own traditions, its own leadership, its own network of family relationships built across generations of shared service. During a service week, a priest lived in Jerusalem alongside hundreds of other men from his same division, men who had known each other since childhood, men whose fathers had served together, breath whose daughters married each other's sons, who shared a specific bodily knowledge, the weight of the wood, the smell of the blood, the sound of the morning trumpet call signaling the first sacrifice, that no one outside the priesthood possessed. The community was built from shared physical experience, but the community was also fractured. The priesthood of the first century was politically stratified in ways that created genuine tension inside the same temple precincts. The high priestly families, the Boethusians, the family of Annas, the Fireby family, controlled the highest offices and the greatest economic resources. The ordinary division priest who came to Jerusalem for his 2 weeks of service each year occupied a completely different position in the same hierarchy. The Jerusalem Talmud preserves a lament, breath, almost certainly authentic in its emotional content, attributed to ordinary. Priests complaining that the high priestly families sent their servants to take by force the hides of sacrificial animals that should have belonged to the officiating priests. The hierarchy of holiness did not map neatly onto the experience of justice. The Mishnah Tractate Midot describes the nighttime guard arrangement in detail. 5 guard posts at the temple building itself, 24 at the gates of the outer courts, all manned by priests and Levites walking rotations through the dark. A supervisory official called the Ish Har-Habayit, the man of the Temple Mount, made regular rounds through the night. Any priest found sleeping at his post was punished. The official would burn his garment with a torch. For the priest not on night watch, the ordinary member of his division sleeping in Jerusalem during the service week, the night was short. After the lamps burned down, there was nothing to do but sleep. What he saw, lying on his mat in the dark before closing his eyes, was the ceiling of a limestone room. What he heard was the city settling, the stone retaining walls of the temple platform transmitting small sounds across great distances in the quiet, and the calls of the Levitical guards at the temple gates. The night sky above Jerusalem in the 1st century had no light pollution. In the deepest hours of the night, lying in a temple courtyard to catch what breeze existed in the summer heat, a priest watching the sky above Jerusalem would have seen the full canopy of the Milky Way arcing from south to north, the stars close and distinct, the planets moving visibly against the fixed background across the weeks. The same stars described in the Psalms, which this priest had memorized and sang in temple worship, were the stars above his head before he slept. Psalm 134, one of the shortest in the Psalms of Ascent collection, is addressed specifically to the overnight temple servants, those who stand in the house of the Lord in the nights. The priest who heard those words sung in the temple courts knew who they were about. He knew from physical experience what it felt like to stand in the temple in the dark hours, holding a post, watching. Zechariah is still silent when the afternoon lottery begins without him. He has completed his incense duty. He will not be called for that again. Not this week, not ever. He stands in the courts while another man's number is called. Another man enters the holy place. Another man pours the compound onto the coals. The morning that took his voice is already receding into the ordinary rhythm of the temple day. In the afternoon, everything repeats. The second Tamid begins. Another lottery, another lamb, another precise sequence of coordinated priestly labor ascending and descending the altar ramp, another incense offering in the holy place. The second priest of the day entering alone, standing before the same curtain, pouring the same compound onto fresh coals. Another priestly blessing on the steps of the entrance hall, this time in the fading afternoon light. And at dusk, as the daylight fails, the menorah inside. The holy place is lit by the priest assigned to that duty. 7 flames that would burn through the night, the only light in the otherwise dark and closed temple building. The evening sacrifice carried a different atmospheric weight from the morning. The morning Tamid opened the day, inauguration. The evening Tamid closed it, completion. Psalm 141, attributed to David and understood by rabbinic tradition to correspond to the evening incense offering, opens with this: Lord, I call to you. Come quickly to me. Hear me when I call to you. May my prayer be set before you like incense. May the lifting up of my hands be like the evening sacrifice. The psalmist is praying in a private moment and reaches for the temple liturgy as the closest available image of sincerity. His prayer rising to God, like incense. His outstretched hands, like the evening Tamid. The daily sacrifice had not merely remained a religious act. It had become a civilization's deepest image of genuine prayer. By the time the evening offering burned to completion and the great bronze doors of the Nicanor gate were swung closed, 20 men on the doors, the Temple Mount was transitioning into its nighttime state. The priests who were not on watch returned to their chambers. The watchmen took their positions. And in the Holy of Holies, behind the great veil, the presence of God was understood to dwell, untouched, unviewed, visited only once per year, on Yom Kippur, by the high priest alone. The priest on night watch walked his post in the silence of the closed temple and knew, without needing to be reminded, what was on the other side of that curtain. He did not need to see it. He worked beside it every day. There is a word in Hebrew that governed every moment of this priest's day, from the moment his feet hit the cold mosaic floor to the moment he closed his eyes under the Milky Way. Kadosh. It is usually translated as holy, But the Hebrew scholar Jacob Milgrom, whose lifelong commentary on Leviticus remains the definitive scholarly treatment of the priestly system, argued that holiness in the priestly worldview was not primarily a moral category. It was a category of differentiation. Kadosh means set apart, physically, spatially, materially separated from the common domain and placed into a different category of existence. The altar was Kadosh because it was separated from ordinary use. The Sabbath was Kadosh because it was separated from ordinary time. The priest was Kadosh because he was separated from ordinary occupation, ordinary contact, ordinary diet, ordinary life. The priest's body operated under restrictions that were spatially and materially specific. He could not come into contact with a human corpse except for his closest relatives. A restriction that meant he could not attend the funerals of neighbors, could not assist in preparing the dead, had to cross to the other side of the road when he encountered a body on his path. That detail is worth pausing on because most people have encountered it before without realizing it. The parable of the Good Samaritan in Luke chapter 10 features a priest who sees a man beaten and bleeding on the road to Jericho and crosses to the other side. For 2,000 years, this priest has been read primarily as a symbol of religious hypocrisy, a man who knew the law and refused to practice its mercy. That reading is not entirely wrong, but it is incomplete. The man in the road was bleeding, apparently unconscious, his condition indistinguishable from death. A priest who touched a corpse contracted the most severe form of ritual impurity, a 7-day defilement that would have removed him from temple service entirely. He was traveling toward Jerusalem. He was almost certainly traveling to serve. The priestly obligation the law placed on his body was in direct conflict with the mercy the moment demanded. Jesus chose that tension deliberately. He was not painting a simple portrait of a callous man. He was describing a system in which the requirements of holiness and the demands of human compassion could stand in the same road and look at each other, and a man would have to choose. The cultural assumption that shaped everything this priest did, the frame through which all his labor was understood, was one the modern world no longer shares. It is the assumption that ritual purity was a real category of existence with real consequences. Not spiritual consequences in the abstract, but immediate, practical, economic ones. An impure priest could not eat the teruma. He could not perform temple service. He could not cross the soreg into the inner courts. Impurity was a physical condition caused by physical contact with specific things. Death, certain skin conditions, certain animals. And it was resolved through specific physical acts. Immersion, waiting, time. And now the linguistic detail that carries the entire day into a different register entirely. The priestly blessing, those 6 ancient lines from Numbers chapter 6, spoken with raised hands at the close of each sacrifice, contains a phrase whose meaning is visible in the Hebrew in a way that most English translations quietly flatten. Ya'er Adonai panav elecha. The Lord make his face to shine upon you. Panav, his face, not his favor, not his blessing in the abstract, not a diffuse benevolence radiating outward from an impersonal source. His face, the God who dwelled behind the veil in the Holy of Holies, the God whose face Moses was told could not be directly witnessed and survived, is invoked in the priestly blessing as one who turns, who directs his gaze, who looks at a specific person in a specific moment and orients toward them. Every morning and every evening, the priest stood on the steps of the entrance hall, raised his hands over the gathered worshippers, people who had come from homes and farms and workshops and grief and hope and confusion, and spoke the words that said, "The one behind that curtain knows your name and turns toward you." He did this not because he felt inspired. He did this because it was the third lottery of the morning and the lot had fallen on him, and this was his day, ordinary labor, unrepeatable weight, Gather every detail of this day and hold it together for a moment. A man wakes before dawn and steps onto cold limestone in the dark. He descends into 200 gallons of Jerusalem rainwater in a rock-cut cistern beneath his house. He dresses in white linen with practiced hands. He eats wheat bread in a courtyard where the morning star is still visible above the Mount of Olives. He draws lots for duties he may or may not prefer, standing in a circle of other men in white linen in the pre-dawn dark. He climbs a 15-foot altar while it is still warm. He carries a basin of blood quickly across stones that smell of the accumulated history of every sacrifice offered on those same stones for 100 years before. He enters a gold-lined room alone and pours a compound no one outside his family knows how to make onto coals, and he prostrates himself before a curtain. He raises his hands over strangers and speaks 6 lines of ancient Hebrew that have been spoken at this hour, in this place, for longer than anyone currently living can remember. He eats the food of his priestly portion. He walks his post under the Milky Way, and he wakes and does it again. The letter to the Hebrews, a text almost certainly written by someone with priestly education and intimate familiarity with this system, spends 10 chapters unpacking exactly the world we have walked through today. Every detail, the garments, the incense, the blood, the veil, the high priest entering the Holy of Holies once per year. The writer's argument, developed with patient precision, is that every element of this machinery pointed forward, that the entire elaborate structure of priestly service was a working model of something that had not yet arrived when it was designed. The incense priest alone before the curtain on the one morning of his career that the lot finally fell on him. The blood on the altar that could cover sin for a year before needing to be repeated. The veil that separated the serving priest from the presence he served. The writer of Hebrews does not say these things were false. He says they were accurate. Accurate the way a scale model is accurate, true in every proportion, waiting for the thing it models to arrive in full scale. The curtain of the temple, according to all 3 synoptic gospels, tore from top to bottom on a Friday afternoon at the 9th hour, 3 in the afternoon, which was, by the temple schedule we have now followed through this entire day, the precise hour of the evening Tamid, the moment the second lamb of the day was being offered at the great altar, the hour of the constant, unbroken, daily sacrifice, the moment when somewhere inside the temple a priest was descending the altar ramp for the last time, and another was ascending, and the fire that had never gone out was receiving its evening portion. Some of the priests serving at that moment would have felt the earth move and looked up and seen the great curtain tear, and would have known, in the marrow of their priestly training, that something categorical had changed, that the kadosh, the set-apartness, had been permanently rearranged, that the architecture of proximity had been redesigned from behind the veil outward. The Book of Acts records, almost in passing, that in the years following, a great many of the priests became obedient to the faith. A great many of the priests, men who understood what the curtain was and what it meant that it was gone. Men who had spent their lives serving at the altar, learning the incense compound, waking before dawn, stepping into cold water, raising their hands over strangers, and who looked at what had happened on that Friday afternoon and recognized it. Not because someone explained it to them from the outside, because they had been rehearsing it every morning of their working lives from the inside. The last image to carry out of this reconstruction is not the blood or the incense or the golden altar or the great curtain. It is the moment before dawn in a limestone courtyard in Jerusalem where a priest stands alone. The city still holds the cold of the night. The sky is beginning to shift from black to the deep blue that the Shema required. The first birds are beginning in the valley below. The smoke from the neighbor's bread oven is rising in the still air, and the man says quietly, the words he has said every morning since he was old enough to understand them, "Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. He says it not because he has just experienced a vision or because he feels particularly moved that morning. He says it because the sky is the right color, and that is when you say it, and because the discipline of saying it every morning at the right color sky has become, over years, the thing that orients the rest of the day. The theology arrived through the habit. The spiritual understanding settled into the body through repetition until the body knew it without being told. The sacred was never somewhere else. It was here, in the limestone and the rainwater and the bread and the blood, waiting to be attended to. Out of everything we have walked through today, the pre-dawn lottery, the stone vessels, the cold mikveh beneath the house, the incense in the sanctuary, the night sky above the temple courts, the curtain that tore at the hour of the evening sacrifice. I want to know which physical detail stopped you. Which one made the world of this priest feel real to you in a way it never had before? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone. If this reconstruction is the kind of work you want to keep doing, walking through the lost physical worlds of Scripture, rebuilding them from the ground up, finding what they reveal that the Sunday school version left out, then subscribe and stay close. There are a lot of worlds left to walk through. Every one of them has something in it you have not seen yet.